Welcome all. Welcome to the 6th INA session of 2024. Today's talk was coordinated by IIT Delhi Applied Mechanics Department, Naval Constructor Wing. Today we are going to have an interesting talk on naval sonar and marine mammals collaborative steps towards reducing the impact. Today's chief guest is Captain Christie, and the presenter is Mr. Abhishek Jamalabad. It's my privilege to introduce the session chair for the day, Dr. Tata Sudhakar. Dr. Tata Sudhakar has 40 years of experience in oceanographic institutes, NIOT Chennai and NIO Goa, where he has worked on the development of ocean observation systems like tsunami detection systems, Argo floats, and ocean drifters. He has received the National Geoscience Award from Ministry of Mines, Government of India, in the category of disaster management for contributions in establishment of Indian Tsunami Warning System in 2012, Certificate of Merit from the Ministry of Earth Science, Government of India in 2013, and IETE Toshniwal Award in 2017. He is a Fellow of Academy of Science, Chennai in the year 2022, and he has contributed to many research programs both at national and international levels, like Commonwealth Science Council Program for Caribbean Islands, 5th Indian Expedition to Antarctica, National Data Buoy Program, and establishment of calibration and validation system for ISRO's OceanSat satellites. He has filed over 13 patents, 12 technology transfers to the industry, and has over 50 publications in international and national journals. And I personally know him to be well aware of the ocean because of his extensive field experience. With this brief introduction, I would like to hand the session over to the session chair, Dr. Sudhakar.
Thank you, Bharaj. I'm happy to be chairing this session. First, I welcome Chief Guest KGK Christine, retired from Indian Navy. And then we have a very interesting presentation from Abhishek. Actually, it's a very interesting because before my core, I was working in NIO Goa, and I was geophysicist. And we used to do the deep ocean seismics for not for the oil, but finding out the deep layers. Out of fact, the noise we used to create using that airgun seismics, we always used to think that how much we disturb the mammals. Here, of course, today's topic is actually naval sonars and marine mammals collaborative steps towards reducing the impact. I think oil industry actually does much major disturbance than actually the sonars, I think. So it's a very interesting topic. And I'll do the first introduction to the chief guest, Captain Christine. He's a shipbuilding professional having extensive experience in both warship and commercial shipbuilding. He was head of the naval design team that designed the indigenous aircraft carrier during the basic design phase from 2000 to 2005. Thereafter, he was a director of shipbuilding in GRSE, Kolkata, and later was vice president and head of ship design at L&T Shipbuilding, Chennai. At the moment, he is a semi-retired providing consultancy in ship design, SEDS Kochi. He has graduated from IIT Kharagpur with a BTech honors in naval architecture 1980 and subsequently did his postgraduation in MIT, USA in the field of naval architecture, marine engineering and mechanical engineering. Thank you, sir, for being a chief guest. Now I'll do the introduction of the speaker, Mr. Abhishek. Abhishek is a marine biologist and the lead of the marine program at Habitat Trust. His work over the past 10 years had included the marine mammal studies, fishery research, and forest and health monitoring, and impact educating the awareness through various media and marine ecosystems and their connection with the human beings. At the Habitat Trust, he steers the marine program in its pursuit of conserving complex marine ecosystem with a concept and cross-discipline collaborative approach. What we'll do is actually, once Abhishek finishes, any audience who wanted to ask a speaker, actually you can type your question, and then I will read out and go through it. And anybody wants to interact personally, please press the hand thing so that we can add you into the group and then have a verbal questioning to the speaker. Mr. Abhishek, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much for the introduction, sir. I'll just share my screen. I hope the slideshow is visible.
Yeah, it is visible.
It's good.
Go ahead.
Okay. I want to start by saying that as Dr. Sudhakar introduced me, I am a biologist by profession. And the whole aspect of naval sonar and the work that we have been doing with the Indian Navy with regards to that topic of late, it's been sort of new ground for me. So there are a lot of technical aspects of sonar and submarine sound that I am not personally already familiar with. But with people like Dr. Sudhakar who have worked on that aspect, and I'm sure there are multiple others in the audience also who have expertise in that area. So I would really value any interaction from your side and anything that I could also learn from you about this aspect. Um, to introduce the Habitats Trust in a little more detail, this is a nature conservation NGO, which is headed by the chairperson of HCL Technology, that is Ms. Roshni Nadar Malhotra. And it was established in 2018, and it has many verticals that work on different kinds of ecosystems in different parts of the country. This includes terrestrial ecosystems, riverine systems, and there is the marine and coastal side, which is handled by my program within the organization. We work closely with several government agencies, such as several state forest departments. We are working with the Indian Navy. We will soon be working with the Indian Coast Guard starting from next month. So we really value a collaborative approach, whether it is collaborating with small organizations and individuals who are familiar with specific areas, or with larger entities such as the Indian Navy. And we believe that this collaboration and combination of strengths, some coming from us and some coming from our partners, is the only thing that can make nature conservation happen actually in a big way in the current day and age. So I'll go ahead and start my presentation. We'll be covering a few different sections in this presentation. I'll take you through those sections one by one. To start with, marine mammals. I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with marine mammals, so we'll cover a brief introduction of that, about what they are, why they matter, and why sound is so important when it comes to marine mammals. The marine mammals that we're talking about are called cetaceans, and cetaceans are basically whales, dolphins, and porpoises. When we say marine mammals more broadly, it also includes things like the dugong, which is found in India. And outside India, it also includes things like sea otters, polar bears, etc. But when we talk about sound in this case, we are talking strictly about cetaceans, which is the animals you see on your screen here, whales, dolphins, and porpoises. There are more than 30 that are recorded. The ones pictured here are only the ones that are more well recorded, with many multiple records of from Indian waters. And as you can see, they range in size from the biggest animal to ever live on this planet, the blue whale, which is at the top, to some much smaller dolphins and porpoises that you see on the right side of the screen. And when we think of marine mammals, we think of an open ocean habitat, a deep sea habitat where they may all be living. But this is not true. They have very strict habitat preferences. Each species has a different kind of lifestyle, different diet, and they live in different areas accordingly. Submarine topography, as you know, is very varied. There are ridges, there are seamounts, there are canyons in some places. There is the continental slope, which is a very productive area. And all of these species occupy different places. Some prefer to live very close to the coast near river mouths. Some prefer islands like Lakshadweep, etc. So we're talking about a very varied and very diverse set of animals when we talk about cetaceans. How they are important, I'm sure all of you have heard somewhere or the other that every species in an ecosystem is essential. It has its own role. It does something in the food chain and has some other environmental services that it provides also. And the removal of a species from an ecosystem causes some sort of imbalance. This is a basic thing that we are all taught, we're all familiar with. But whales are particularly important in that respect because they do much more than just control food webs. This phenomenon that you see on your screen is called the whale pump, and it's basically a nutrient cycling in the ocean that is done by whales. So whales are active near the surface because they're air breathing mammals like us. So they need to come to the surface to breathe. And many of them also dive quite deep down for feeding. They feed on deep sea squid. Some of them feed on plankton, which is closer to the surface, and then they go down a little for resting. And this keeps like they keep traveling up and down vertically within the sea a lot. The example used here is a sperm whale, which is a very deep diving animal that feeds on deep sea squid. So what this whale does is it takes a breath and then it goes down. It feeds at depth, which means it is gathering nutrients at that depth. Then it comes to the surface again to breathe or to rest. And when it's at the surface, it will also poop at the surface. And that poop acts as fertilizer in the upper layers of the ocean. That fertilizer then helps the growth of phytoplankton, which are small unicellular plant-like organisms. Those phytoplankton provide at least 50% of the oxygen available on the planet. And that system of oxygen production is basically fed and fertilized by these whales. And very few other oceanic animals have such a long vertical migration the way whales do. Most of the others, like sharks and others, they're restricted to some depth band in the sea, either shallow or midwater or very deep. They don't move up and down as much as whales do. So this is a very unique service that whales provide. And when a whale dies, it still provides one more service after death. That is when the carcass sinks to the ocean floor. It's a very large, very heavy animal. And over the course of its lifespan, it locks in a lot of carbon into its body when it feeds and grows. In the same way that trees are now promoted, tree plantation is now promoted for carbon sequestration and carbon storage. Whales are actually, if you compare an individual whale to an individual tree, whales are much more efficient at locking and storing carbon in their bodies. They lock more than double the amount. And when this whale carcass sinks, it keeps going down slowly into deeper waters. Ultimately, it reaches the seabed. And at the seabed, it feeds a whole deep sea ecosystem, which relies heavily on such large carcasses coming down. And once it is down there, that carbon stays at the bottom. Unlike with many other organisms which store carbon, if it's near the surface, then that carbon soon goes again into the open system, into the atmosphere, etc. But whales have this feature of locking it at a great depth in the sea and storing it there, where it is unlikely to get released very easily. So that's another. These two are very important functions that whales provide, which no other group of animals provides on the planet. When it comes to sound, a lot of marine animals rely on sound because that is the best way to communicate and receive information in the sea. Eyesight is not so important because in most of the sea, eyesight will not work because light is low, turbidity is high near the coast, etc. So sound becomes a very important medium to do things for these animals. And cetaceans are one of the many examples of animals that use that sound. From the chart that I showed you earlier, which has a variety of different species, they all have very differing sound ranges. If you put it together, it comprises as low as 2 hertz, which is lower than what humans can hear, to more than 160 kilohertz, which is much higher than what humans can hear. And there's a very small portion of cetacean sound that is actually audible to us. The sounds are made using phonic lips, which is the white part that you see in this image on the right. This is in the blowhole. So the blowhole is like the nostril for cetaceans. Instead of having a nostril at the tip of their snout, they have it on top of their head. And that blowhole contains these phonic lips, which are basically similar to human vocal cords. And they make sounds using that. and the sound is received through the lower jawbone, because these animals don't have external ear openings, as you may be aware. And there are different kinds of sounds, different categories of sounds, which serve very different purposes. We'll go through some of those. So songs and calls are performed by these larger animals called the baleen whales, such as the blue whale, humpback whale, Brody's whale, and others. These occupy mostly the lower frequencies, 2 hertz to 14 kilohertz. The lower part of this frequency range cannot be heard by humans, but there are some aspects towards the upper end of the human of this range that are audible. They are used mainly for communication between the groups of these whales, and they're also used as breeding calls in the form of songs, which is sort of similar to how birds, like how male birds sing for a mate. In the same way, these whales have very long and well constructed songs. And this type of call is very important for the long term fitness of the population, because it is so important in breeding. So short term communication also to keep in touch with the group. But breeding success of these whales largely depends on their song being good and impressive. So it's very important in that respect. I'll try playing one. Hopefully it's audible. So that was a humpback whale song. I'll skip the blue whale one because there is some audio problem, and that sound is very low, so it may not be audible. In case any of you are interested, I can also send you links to further citation audio recordings if you want to check that out. Another type of sound is called the whistle. This is somewhere in the middle of the spectrum of frequencies used by cetaceans, mid to high frequencies. Again, part of this is within the human listening range, but some of it is far above our listening range. Some of it can be audible on the spot, like if you're out on a ship or a boat, and sometimes in places like Lakshadweep and Andamans, you actually encounter these dolphins swimming alongside your boat. And if you listen carefully, sometimes you can actually hear them whistling. Even on the boat, you can hear them whistling when they're in the water. These whistles are again contact calls to keep in touch with the group, and it's also very complex social communication. So complex, in fact, that dolphins are known to have individual signature whistles. Like each individual dolphin will basically have its own name in the form of a particular whistle sequence. So I'll try playing this one. So this is a high-pitched, very squeaky sounding whistle, if it was audible. The third type is clicks and pulses. These are more towards the higher range for cetaceans. A lot of this is audible, but most of it is far beyond human hearing. Clicks and buzzes are used mainly by dolphins and porpoises, and some animals such as the sperm whale also. They are used for echolocation in the same way that sonar is used artificially, where the sound will be produced at a certain frequency. It will hit an obstacle or a prey, such as a small fish, and it will bounce back, and it will be heard by the animal, by the dolphin. And that's how they locate fish or locate an obstacle like a net, for example, which is in its way. So that's how this is used, and it's constantly varied because they will use different frequencies depending on how fine scale they want their detection to be. For example, if they're trying to detect a wall or an undersea ridge, then it's a large structure. They may not need a very high frequency for that. They'll do it with a low frequency. But let's say, for example, they've located a big school of fish, and now they want to chase and capture only one fish from that school. then they will fine tune that into a much higher frequency, much more accurate. And that's how they will keep varying this frequency that they use. So I'll try playing this also. It might be too high pitched. That was a series of clicks. Let's see if the buzz is also audible. Yeah. The other kind of sound within clicks and pulses is called a coda. Coda is something that is quite specific to very few species, such as the sperm whale. Codas are very well studied in sperm whales. Codas are basically a series of clicks in a specific pattern, similar to Morse code. And these clicks then form words, they form sentences, and a population of whales in a certain region is found to have very fixed codas. It's like they have their own words within that population. If you compare it with another population of the same species on the other side of the ocean, they won't have the same words. There will be some difference in that. So it's actually like language variation in humans. I'll try playing this one also. So if you heard that, it was something like a, and that pattern kept repeating again and again. So that's how a coda works, and it's used for contact communication, not so much for echolocation or things like that. Now coming to the actual topic of this talk, which is what do navies have to do with cetaceans and sonar? So here's a brief history of how navies got involved in the topic of cetacean sonar. So in the year 2000, the US Navy was conducting a routine exercise in the Bahamas Islands in the Atlantic Ocean. And within a very short time of that sonar pinging happening during that training exercise, 17 marine mammals stranded on the islands nearby, and 7 of them died. Of those 17, 14 of them were Cuvier's beaked whales. That is the species that is in the photograph on the left. This photograph is from Karnataka from 2011 or 12, I believe. I had taken this in Karnataka. This animal, of course, there was no postmortem done. There were no facilities near that village by which we could actually store any tissue or do a postmortem. So we don't really know what caused the death of this particular individual. But in the Bahamas, from the ones that were stranded, postmortem studies were done on them, and they showed hemorrhages in the ear and a bit of brain damage, which is very indicative of some sort of sound related stress or something related to how fast they surfaced out of the water. We'll talk a little more about that as well. There were 5 similar strandings of beaked whales again in Greece and the Canary Islands, which is Spanish territory. And those also had coincided with naval exercises near those areas. This is before the Bahamas stranding happened. Later in the same year, in the year 2000, the US Navy came out and confirmed a direct link between their military sonar usage and the Bahamas strandings. This was quite unprecedented because it had been suspected earlier by scientists that some sort of underwater sound disturbance, probably from naval use, was affecting these animals. But this was unprecedented because the US Navy actually acknowledged and confirmed the link based on their own research that they had done after this event. They issued a statement acknowledging that. And interestingly, they also stressed that they wanted to understand these effects better, the effects of sonar on marine mammals. Soon after that, the US Navy opened its doors for researchers to use data from its test and evaluation centers. And this was a huge amount of data again an unprecedented move for the Navy and researchers at that time to work together so closely to understand these effects and inform the Navy of them. Subsequent to that, the US Navy, working together with NOAA, which is the National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration of the US, which is a government body, they have together worked on a consultative approach now. And when the Navy nowadays, if you see, the US Navy, when they want to conduct some sort of a training exercise involving sonar, they actually hold a consultation with independent researchers and with the government, and they invite comments on how the impacts could be minimized. If they feel that the place where they're going to do that exercise actually has a lot of marine mammals, then this consultative approach is now usually followed. Coming to the Indian Navy, the Indian Navy is, of course, a regional leader in security and also a globally significant player in naval influence, which is evidenced by the Indian Navy's close involvement with joint exercises with the US Navy, French Navy, etc. So there is an opportunity here, a very important and I would also say a rare opportunity for the Indian Navy to lead by example in direct conservation in the areas where it works, especially considering the Indian Ocean is a very rich biodiverse area with a lot of cetacean species and a lot of other marine life. In March of 2023, the Habitats Trust signed an MOU with the Indian Navy. And one of the many points in that MOU is to reduce the Navy's ecological footprint. And this is a request that came from the Navy itself on asking us how we could help them reduce their impact on the environment. And there was a strong emphasis from senior naval staff and now also from the Department of Military Affairs towards fulfilling the specific objective of mitigating sonar impact, because this is something that the US Navy, as I said before, has been leading by example in that respect. And the Indian Navy officials also felt that there is an opportunity here for the Indian Navy to lead by example in this region, especially because they work closely with the US Navy. So this is in fact a point which, although I and the Habitats Trust, we are on the conservation side, we are the conservationists, you would say. But it's interesting that this request actually came from the Navy. It is not something we suggested. It's something the Navy requested us to do for them on informing how they could reduce their impacts. And the Habitats Trust, of course, has complete commitment towards offering support on how to do this. And we, like I said, our strengths are in ecology and some of the on-ground conservation solutions that we have been working on. And we bring those strengths. So if we combine those strengths with the Navy, there's something that surely can be done. So as a first step towards meeting that objective, we prepared and submitted a note on the effects of naval sonar on marine mammals and a few preliminary steps towards reducing the impact, along with some recommendations. So I'll talk about the salient features of this note now. Firstly, it covered the known impacts known from studies around the world, because very little research into this specific area has been done in India or tropical waters. So there were three kinds of effects that the note covered. One is the most visible acute short-term effect, which is seen in many cases, including in the Bahamas case, which I spoke about earlier. That effect is something that leads to disorientation in these animals, because a sudden loud ping from a sonar apparently causes some sort of pressure perception anomaly in these cetaceans, because they're very sensitive to pressure, because they dive pretty deep, much deeper than most other animals would dive from the surface. Those of you who may be familiar with scuba diving, you may be knowing how risky it is to surface very fast from a dive. And if you do that and the nitrogen is not completely dissolved into your blood, then it comes out in the form of, if there is a lot of nitrogen in your blood and you surface too soon, it causes something called the bends, which manifests as a pain in the joints, a pain in the blood vessels, and in bad cases, it can also cause death. And cetaceans, being mammals with a very similar circulatory system to humans, they face these same symptoms when they surface too soon from a dive. And apparently, sonar leads to disorientation, which causes rapid surfacing, possibly due to panic, and that results in bends. And if there's a large group of animals, like many dolphins group together in large numbers, sometimes in the hundreds also, if that happens and a few dolphins are affected, many others will follow them, even if they're not affected, although often they are also affected. And that is what results in a mass stranding, where a whole large group of dolphins or multiple groups of them will come out and they'll strand themselves on a beach, apparently to escape the stress underwater. And that causes a large number of deaths in a single incident. Other short-term effects, which are not fatal, would be things like abandoning optimal habitats and behaviors. For example, if a certain marine mammal is engaged in a breeding behavior, like singing, for example, in whales, or let's say it's engaged in foraging dive, where it's trying to find food. It gets disturbed by the sonar, it will abandon that activity, it will abandon that habitat and move to something else, move away and start doing something else. That may not be fatal, but it is a significant cost of energy for that animal. And it's when it abandons breeding, it is abandoning basically its population's fitness. Or if it abandons feeding, that means it's going to go hungry a little longer and maybe be susceptible to other impacts as a result of that. So that's also a possibility that is known. And then there are long-term effects wherein humpback whales, for example, which have very complex breeding songs, if they're constantly disturbed by sonar or even other sources of underwater sound, doesn't have to be specifically sonar, then they have been found to adjust their songs accordingly to sort of cope with that disturbance. Now, if that adjusted song is not as good as the original one, that affects breeding success and mating success. So the impact of this will be seen much later in the future generations of that population. You'll see maybe a reduction in new young ones in the population, for example. So this is an example of a long-term effect. This set of graphs, I won't go into too much detail. They're very technical graphs, but basically they show you the severity score of the response of an animal in response to changing sound pressure levels from the sonar. So basically the takeaway that I want to show from this set of graphs is that different species, different kinds of marine mammals respond very differently. And that's because their hearing ranges are different. The sound they use for their own echolocation is different. The depths to which they dive are different. And that's why you will see different responses from them. In the Canary Islands in Spain, when there were many pinging associated stranding incidents earlier, and after that, when the link between mid-frequency active sonar and strandings was admitted by the US Navy, that region subsequently banned all use of naval mid-frequency active sonar. That is basically the government of Spain passed that resolution to ban the use of sonar in that region. That has shown immediate good effects. As of 2019, since that ban in 2004, there have been no unusual stranding, atypical strandings, meaning strandings which are not from a natural cause usually. So that has greatly reduced. So that has been a positive impact. However, there's a catch here that I also admit, which is with national security in mind for the Indian Navy, this may not always be a practical approach because we can't do away with pinging altogether. These are, of course, exercises that are critical to national security. So it's not always practical to pass a resolution to completely disallow the use of sonar. And with that in mind, we've come up with some recommendations that are part of this note that we submitted. The picture on the left basically sums up what the main recommendation is, which is depending on the distance of a marine mammal from the ship, based on, of course, the ship staff detecting that animal, there are changes that you can implement in your sonar use. LFAS, which is low frequency active sonar, reaches very far, travels a longer distance. Mid frequency travels a relatively shorter distance. So you see these concentric circles, these are the radius of distance of the marine mammal from the ship and what you do accordingly when you sight an animal at that distance from the ship. So again, I won't go into stepwise details with these numbers, but basically it shows that depending on that distance, there is a certain step that you can take to adjust sonar use. This, of course, goes hand in hand with the points on the right, which are firstly, visual and acoustic observer training is a critical part of this. Because if you don't detect the animal itself when you're doing the naval exercise, you can't really know what to do with your sonar use. So they can be detected visually using binoculars from the deck or acoustically using passive acoustics on the ship itself. Second thing is there is something called a ramp up procedure, which is actually quite a simple thing. It just means you gradually start from zero till your maximum sound pressure for the sonar. Instead of just starting a full scale, the loudest possible pulse that you want to achieve. So when you do this gradually, basically the logic is that it gives enough time for the animal to detect small low pressure pulses first and then move out of the area accordingly. And if that's done even over a small amount of time, like 5 minutes, that itself has been found to be quite effective. So there are studies from elsewhere in the world backing up this data to say that 5 minutes seems to be an ideal amount of time to gradually onset to maximum amplitude. In the longer term, we actually propose to do long-term research between the Habitats Trust and the Navy. And these are again of many different kinds. One of them is to understand cetacean soundscapes in the area around India, in the seas around India. This could be something, for example, that the Habitats Trust could take up as a large long-term research project with facilitation by the Indian Navy, such as providing ships to deploy and retrieve equipment and giving us access to these remote areas. The second is to study responses to naval sonar, which is to actually have ship-based observers looking out for marine mammals at the time of pinging exercises. This will involve direct participation of the Indian Navy staff, who are basically the deck-based observers in this case. And they will be noting down data on how different animals are behaving differently based on what they sight. So that is another example. The third one is sound propagation models. Now, all of these previous studies that I cited, the ones done abroad, they're mostly done in temperate waters and cold water areas such as the Arctic, etc., where the US Navy conducts a lot of its exercises. The sound propagation basically now depends on the water temperature, salinity, and things like that. And those parameters are very different in India's tropical waters compared to the ones where studies are already done. So that is a step that will have to be largely led by the Indian Navy to conduct these studies during their exercises. And ultimately, the Indian Navy and THT aim to come up with fine-tuned guidelines using all of this above long-term research, which will be very location relevant, very season and species relevant. so that the Navy doesn't have to follow a blanket set of guidelines that is adopted from somewhere else. The blanket set is, of course, what is described here on the left in the picture. And it's a blanket set of guidelines because it has been adopted from what the US Navy already uses. But if we do our own research and you can fine tune these guidelines, it will be much less of a hindrance on security needs. There may be certain areas where it's absolutely fine to ping the normal way without really having to follow guidelines if that area is not an important marine mammal area. But that is data that we don't have yet, which we need to get in collaboration with the Navy. A few other steps on the cards. The Indian Navy has a lot of acoustic data, and in meetings with them, the naval staff have told us that there is data of biological origin, which is not really important for security needs. So, if this sort of data could be made available for research, that could be a great launchpad to understand what is where, which species are vocalizing where, and accordingly focus our further research. The second is a very simple thing, which is systematic logging of cetacean sightings. A lot of naval sailors and deck officers have told us that they sight dolphins and whales quite frequently when they go out on vessel sorties. If these could be documented somewhere, logged somewhere in a systematic but easy fashion, it would still add a very robust layer of, firstly, ground truthing for the acoustic studies that we do. And also, they may help identify areas where these animals are sighted more often. So, it could be a critical area to focus on for acoustic research. So, to quickly sum up, the three main takeaways from my talk have been put into points here. Firstly, cetacean health and safety now in a time where the Earth is going through a lot of species loss and major climate change and collapse of ecosystems. In a time like this, cetacean health and safety in relation to sonar does need critical attention. Not just sonar, a lot of other industries are also part of this. There is commercial shipping that produces ship-based noise. There is oil prospecting that produces airgun bursts and many other things. And so naval sonar is just one part of it, but it is a critical part to focus on. We should make sure that it doesn't remain a blind spot when we're addressing problems here. Secondly, in the Indian Ocean, the Indian Navy is primed to be the agency that leads by example here because of all the access it has, because of the technology it has, and by being the person to self-impose practical sonar regulations. The Indian Navy is a key player in this regard. And lastly, the success and practicality of how practical it is to actually implement this can be greatly enhanced by joint research activities into the future. These are, of course, ambitious objectives, I have to admit. It's unprecedented. It hasn't been tried in India. But undoubtedly, since we're already in a collaboration with the Navy, which we are 1 year into as of now, it seems undoubtedly possible to do it. The only thing is for THT, it is essential to understand what can work for the IN and what won't. Because Indian naval data is not so easily accessible for very obvious reasons. It is sensitive data, but we need to know what works and what doesn't so that we can bring in our strengths accordingly. And that has been happening. I'm not highlighting it as an issue because it has been happening in dialogue for the past 1 year. But making the most of this and combining our strengths is what will definitely help realize this goal. Thank you so much.
Yeah, excellent talk, Abhishek.
Thank you, sir.
Before I go back to audience questions, I have actually one suggestion and one question for you. One suggestion is actually NIOT Chennai has a lot of acoustic data collected from using the Move Voice. Okay, they have collecting the last 10 years. And if it is a civilian, it's easy to get the data. Probably actually you can approach them if you want to have a lot of noise data from the acoustic data actually. And they collected 3 locations, I think 2 in the West Coast and 1 in the East Coast continuously for last 10 years they have. And my question is actually, we are actually talking about the effects of sonars on the bigger mammals like dolphins and whales. What will happen to the smaller ones like phytoplankton, which are very, very important to the food chain?
That's a question that has not yet been answered by research, I'm afraid. But I agree with you. There have been sonar impacts that have been seen on certain fish,
Okay.
which function very differently from marine mammals. So
Okay.
I'm sure that there must be some sort of an impact on most marine life forms.
Oh.
But what the exact impact is on plankton is, at least for me, I'm not very aware of it, of the technical details of it.
Actually, you can, of course, I see you're working a lot of work with the Navy and NPO or means organizations. Actually, you should look for these data sets from the oceanographic institutions. They
Yes,
have a lot of data for helping you for doing the major studies.
yes.
Then I'll go back to questionnaire. Anything is a Q&A? Anything is there?
With your permission, as Q&A are available, can we invite the chief guest for his comments, sir?
Yes, sir. Great. So, Captain Christine, sir, your comments, sir.
All, congratulations for a very interesting.
Sir, your mic is mute, sir.
No, can you hear me? No.
We can hear you very softly, sir.
No, no, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? But it was quite loud and clear some time back. Okay. Some technical. Can you hear me at all?
Can hear you faintly, sir.
Faintly, sir.
1 second.
Yeah, it's excellent, sir. Now.
No,
Yeah.
it's excellent, sir. Please.
You can hear me well?
Yes, sir. We can
Yes,
hear you
sir.
well, sir. Please, sir.
Okay, fine. Yeah, I just plugged my external mic and put it back. So that is normally it works. So anyway, congratulations, Abhishek, for a very interesting at the same time very relevant topic.
Thank you.
I must admit it's a little out of my league, marine biology and all those things what we discussed. So I approached it with the zeal of a student trying to learn something new. And that is what has happened. I could really capture a lot of things which is very much relevant and a lot of people are talking about. Now, I am generally aware that as a human being, we have to look after our environment just in order to look after ourselves. A lot of natural disasters, as we call it, are actually caused by us, though we don't want to admit it. So probably this is something which you have brought it out, and maybe somebody will look at it and do some corrective action before it becomes, a big catastrophe. So what I have seen is that about, you said these whales are, cycling the nutrient by going diving and coming up. Okay, and these sonars are impacting their breeding songs, mating calls, and it changes the pressure, and then it disorients them. And then they all go into various directions, and we have seen that they all go together, one person leading the other, and then finally they get stranded and they die. So these are all great knowledge. Of course, we have heard in the newspaper that suddenly so many mammals go on beach, but then probably we never understood the reason or possible reason why they are doing it. Anyway, those things you have brought out very clearly. And also, I'm very happy to note that Indian Navy has actually, jumped into it and want to lead by example by contributing to your research and also, contributing to the marine life by adjusting their sonar. But I don't know, and the security scenario, how much they will be able to do it. If somebody comes to know that they are adjusting all this, then they will find an excuse to sneak under us. But anyway, that's a security issue, and I'm sure Indian Navy will look after or will look into it. But anyway, very happy to know that you are collaborating with the Navy, and Navy is willing to share their data with you so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Now, India is looking into play a lead role in globally in many areas, and it would be very nice that we can set an example and the rest of the world follow. So these are some of the very brief comments I have. I'm sure there are a lot of people who are more knowledgeable and they would like to know more about it. So I leave the field open to them. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, I'll
Yep.
continue Q&A. The one question I got it is from Ashwini. Just curious about the kind of data you will be needing. As I understand, you may get the sonar data from the Navy, but unless you get the behavior of the animals and link them to the sonar data, it may be difficult to derive any meaningful conclusion. Is there any plan towards getting the response of the animals and link them to the ion sonars?
So there are two kinds of data here. One is what the animals are doing anyway in the absence of active sonar, which is basically passive acoustic data collected by naval hydrophone arrays. That is one type of data. The second is what you mentioned, which is the response, the behavioral response of those animals to active sonar. So the second part, as far as I know from our conversation with the Indian Navy, has not been looked into in India. As a direct result of active sonar, what the animals do has not been looked into. But the first part, which is passive detection of animals, this there is data on. And Dr. Sudhakar, if I'm not mistaken, NIOT had published a paper on humpback whale song, which was recorded off the southwest coast using naval hydrophone arrays. So that kind of data does exist. It will be a lot of data to actually look through and see what is of biological origin, what is actually usable. But for many species, especially for the larger whales, we know from studies in different parts of the world how to understand their behavior from the sound that is detected. For example, if there is a humpback whale breeding call, if we detect that from the naval data, we will instantly know it's a breeding call. We don't need to have ground truthing, visual ground truthing to say that the whale was breeding. So there is some existing information by which we can get useful insights from the passive acoustic data. As far as responses to sonar goes, that has not been done yet. And it's something that we are trying to initiate with the Navy.
Yeah, there are comments out there, but no questions. There are many actually. One is Arvind, well presented and acknowledged the lecture, clarified a lot of stuff for me. Vice versa, what we are doing in the commercial shipping. I hope we can help in research in way going forward. Then Krishna Kumar, Krishnan Kuti, sorry. An extremely interesting presentation, giving a lot of fascinating facts, not known to the public. And the presenter depth of knowledge is evident from the effortless way he has made the presentation. A lot of good comments for you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
And Das Gupta, hearty congratulations to the speaker for an excellent presentation on a topic of interest. The issues under discussion at the MSc meeting at AIMO. This is Mr. Das Gupta's comment. Yeah, this is why the speed of the, I think this could be easy. He has put in a comment, but I think it's a question. Why speed through water less than 10 or knots need to be achieved crossing the voluntary report areas in US and Canadian waters for all the ships types does not serve purpose of reducing the sound impact. If you want to make a comment on that?
That is unfortunately beyond my realm of
Okay.
understanding.
Okay.
It may have something to do with sound, but I'm not very sure.
Yeah, there are two more questions will come, and I'll just go through it. Then, and this Ramanand Ajit Shonai. My thanks to Mr. Abhishek for highlighting an important area of consideration of ecological concern. It is good to see collaboration between the THT and the IN. We'll be interested, Mr. Abhishek, view on collaboration between THT and institutions like NIOT and universities about mapping the area inhabited by different in the Indian Ocean. This may surely help the THT-IN project. I think somebody is doing this, I thought. There is one institution in, I'll leave it to you the question, but I'll add actually. I know a little bit about how MOS functions. There is institution in Semalari in Cochin. They're actually trying to map the areas of species. That you can add actually information about that. Yeah.
As far as that suggestion goes on collaboration, I'm completely game for it. I'm sure that it's such a huge area, the Indian EEZ, and the quantum of data itself is so huge. Possibility of doing studies into this aspect is so huge that I do think that multi-institute collaboration is the only way forward. Yeah. So completely agree about the collaboration point. The only reason I haven't got into it so far is probably because I'm handling enough projects already. But if I have additional hands, and I do see it completely aligning with the work we're doing with the Navy also. So definitely it's something I will explore. Thank you so much for the suggestion.
Yeah. Then there's one question from Aditya Ghosh. Implementing a seasonal or geophysical restrictions on the sonar use at places where there is no of catastrophic ocean could be high can be a solution. But
yes,
maybe, yeah, your
definitely
comments. Yeah, it's difficult.
Definitely it can be, and this is one of those regulations which will actually require finer scale data on which species of marine mammals occur in which areas, where they move in which season, and what they do in what season. Once we have that data, basically we'll have a map of seasonal marine mammal movements and what behavior is exhibited in which areas. For example, humpback whales don't sing everywhere. They have specific locations in the sea where they seem to prefer singing. There are a few islands near the west coast of India where they have done that. And they've been recorded singing near Kanyakumari, for example. So we know these exact locations. But if there is more data to validate this and make it actually a robust data set, and to do it for multiple species, then once we have that, definitely seasonal and temporal and geographic closures for sonar is a very practical thing to do. And I think the Navy also would greatly appreciate that, given that these regulations should not hinder operations of national importance, such as naval exercises. So that fine tuning is definitely very important. We just need the data for it. That's all.
Just for my info, suppose you have a large pool or a lake in your control. You can put one of the species and actually create sounds and see how they behaves. Any of the research is done in our area for that? I'm sure there could be some published data from the US and Russians.
Yeah.
Anything is done from our area?
Nothing done from our area. As you said, it's been done mostly in the US.
Yeah. Okay. They are done it, I know. Yeah. So I don't see any of the questions. Any of the audience who wanted to have a question, please raise the hand or just type the question, please.
I believe Professor Suresh Mishra has raised his hand. So I'm adding him also in the panel.
Can I speak?
Yeah, yes, please.
Yeah, first of all, my congratulations to Abhishek for a very timely and relevant topic today. I have not put my question in writing because I am not sure whether my ignorance leads me to this question. In ocean waves, when we talk about ocean waves, we normally represent it through something called an energy spectrum. That is, we have the various frequencies and the amplitudes and various frequencies, and that gives me a spectrum of energy that is disseminated through the waves. Do sound waves also have an energy spectrum? And if so, is there any measure of what kind of energy spectrum these mammals emit, excepting saying that pressure is measured? Is there anything else like frequency and amplitude and things like that? That's my question number one. My question number two is, occasionally we get a lot of fishes, which are not mammals, kind of committing suicide in thousands on the beach. Is this also an acoustic effect? Is there any data on that? Or it's only the mammals that are affected by acoustic sound, acoustic pressure? These are my two questions. Abhishek, maybe.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Your first question about energy spectrums for sound waves. I'm not sure if it's the exact same framework that is used for ocean waves, but we do measure amplitude, frequency, and not just the pressure levels when we talk about this. Do we know the energy spectrum that is in the acceptable range for the mammal? I don't think we know that for most mammals. There are a few which what Dr. Sudhakar previously said about studies that have been done in captivity. With you say, for example, you restrict one dolphin to a pool, and then you can, in a very controlled environment, you can study that and see how it responds to which range of the which area of the spectrum. That has been done for very, very, very few species. I'm probably not more than 2-3 species globally, and most species that occur in India and globally are hard to test in captivity also, because of how those animals are. Many of them don't do well in captivity. So what is the acceptable range for them is not so easy to answer. It has to be done through in situ studies in the wild, and doing it in that way will invariably take a very long time and a lot of effort. So we may never know that exactly. We may have to go with some range that we estimate, and probably apply that to multiple species and hope that that is the best guideline to follow. That's for your first question. The second question about fishes getting beached. Some cases, again, this is a thing that has not been very well studied, but in many cases, it has been linked to anoxic conditions in the sea, which form at certain times of the year as a result of certain plankton blooms and things like that. So the oxygen depletion has been known to cause them to come out in many cases. Whether there is an acoustic angle to this, it's a question that has not been answered, because usually we don't know when those acoustic events have happened. We don't know it well enough to correlate it to what we observe on the beach. So that correlation has not been investigated. But there are other known causes, like I said.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Abhishek, there's one more question popped in. Question from Shankar VS. First, thanks for a very informative session. My question is, can we map the ocean in the process of studying marine mammals with the help of sonar, example zones where marine life density is high, etc.?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, sir?
Yeah, he's asking whether we can map the oceans where with the sonars, zones where marine life density is high, etc. I think it is possible. I know.
Yeah, it is possible.
Yeah.
I think it will take a lot of time and effort, but it's definitely possible. What is immediately possible is that there are a lot of ships that already survey ocean topography and nutrient parameters and things like that across a vast area of the Indian EEZ. So those kind of parameters can be used then to see which habitats, which areas are likely to support a large amount of life. For example, if you have an area with strong upwelling and a lot of nutrient, I think it's safe to assume it's an area that will support a lot of marine life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's possibly a more cost-effective way to do it rather than to acoustically actually map all marine life. Yeah.
And also these species, they migrate depending on the season.
Yes.
So it's not easy to map and say, okay, January they'll be here, February they'll be there. It's not easy actually.
Yeah.
So I don't see any of the questions. So
I would be happy to circulate my email ID via the organizers in case anyone has additional questions.
yeah, that would actually helpful. Actually, anybody wants to interact, they can add to it actually. Yeah. So if no more questions, I think it was excellent. I'll sum it up, and it was excellent session. Very, very interesting and actually ecologically very important topic is taken today. And then we discussed, and then I see a lot of response. Questionnaire actually, even though we have only 60 people on the line, we are actually very good questions actually for the from the audience. I thank you for giving Abhishek a very good lecture.
Thank
Let's
you.
have a so yeah. Over you to yeah.
Thank you, sir. It was indeed a very good lecture, very good session. Post the lecture, both with comments from the chief guest and ably conducted by our session chair, Dr. Sudhakar. Today's lecture was very informative, a little different from the normal naval architecture, but this is something which naval architects have to know. Thank you. And today we had around 50 participants, which is compared to our previous averages, it's still on the higher side. On a Saturday, evening to listen to technical lectures. It's my privilege and duty to first thank our chief guest for the day, Captain Christie. I know he was all round, and I know his depth of knowledge, even though his comments were brief, it certainly added value to this session. And Dr. Sudhakar, who ably conducted the session as the session chair. And the speaker, Mr. Abhishek, thanks for bringing a very relevant and important topic and increasing the awareness of the topic. And this lecture was possible because of Lieutenant Commander Kiran Ramesh. I know he's in the audience, but he was the person who contacted both the speaker and the chief guest and enabled that this happens at this time. So I should personally thank Lieutenant Commander Kiran Ramesh, who was the actual, he was the real coordinator for this particular session, to be very frank. And of course, our INA President, Dr. Manu Kurla, and Mr. Amir Ahmad, who is the complete Secretary for IT and Systems at INA, and who is enabling this session to happen smoothly apart from his other responsibilities at INA. And of course, the EC members of INA and all the 50 participants, and the people who made it lively, Professor Mishra, Professor Shenoy, and the other questioners who actually added value to this discussion. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday evening, and thank you. And a good day, and have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for patiently listening and for the questions and comments. Thanks.
All the best, Abhishek. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.